Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday to each of you. Happy Friday. I'm Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am your host of Intentional Conversations VodCast, which is also made into a podcast as well. We're so glad you're here. We have been expecting you as we do every Friday during this hour. We don't take it lightly that you decide to spend this window of time with us. I want to invite you to go to the chat. Let us know where you are joining the conversation from. It is always a treat to us to be able to see the different geographies that are represented across the United States. And we often are even grateful enough to have folks that come from outside of the country. So we are so grateful for you to want to spend this time with us. This is Intentional Conversations VodCast, where we like to intersect dialogue of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice, all the things, all the letters, right? With leadership and business. If you would please, if you feel inclined to be connected with this community, even beyond this hour of time, then drop your LinkedIn information into the chat. That helps us to know that you don't mind people reaching out. I'm going to also share my LinkedIn information. I would love to be in community with each of you and do invite you to follow and connect. I also want to let you know that at NWC, we really do value disability inclusion. So one of the ways in which we like to show up for the disability community is making sure that we have closed caption that's available throughout this window of time. So I just wanted to put that into your hearing if that's of benefit to you as you enjoy this hour as part of the Intentional Conversations podcast. If you're part of our Zoom community, then we love to see smiling faces, but cameras are not required. They're highly encouraged, but certainly we recognize that people are joining in different capacities. Some may be multitasking, just listening in the background. Whatever your situation is, we are grateful that you are here. I want to also give a special shout out to the NWC team who works tirelessly every single week so that we can divide and conquer and bring this virtual production experience to each of you. And I'm so grateful to have the team's support. Okay, once again, if you're just joining us, this is Intentional Conversations VodCast, and we look forward to a great show. Welcome. Let the conversation begin. And that is precisely what we are about to do. If you're just tuning in, you are joining the Intentional Conversations podcast, where we also make the show available in podcast capacity for wherever those individuals like to get their podcast content. And so I just want to welcome you. I want to start by sharing just a little bit of information with each of you. We have folks that are here joined with us as part of our live Zoom community, but we also have individuals that join the show from LinkedIn Live. And so I want to extend a warm welcome to both audiences. If you're on LinkedIn Live, we're watching the comment section very closely. And so we're pulling all of that content into our chat here within Zoom so that we all can be one big community as we learn with and from each other. So May is a really big month. We have celebrated so far so many different national observances, and we continue to do so. Last weekend, there was a celebration of Cinco de Mayo. This entire month is also Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And so AAPI community, we love you, we value you. We want to make sure that we're being allies and standing in support of all of your great contributions. And so I want to make sure that that's in your hearing and that you can find ways to also deepen your knowledge and cultural intelligence of the Asian American Pacific Islander community. It is also Mental Health Awareness Month, and I have been so delighted to see so many people leaning in and sharing information, even their own personal stories this month, because it helps to break the stigma and it helps us all to get more comfortable about prioritizing our mental health. And I hope that you are doing the same for yourself, and you also are sending that message of encouragement to others in your network. Now, this Sunday, I want to extend a very happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers, the mother figures, and everyone that finds it appropriate to be able to celebrate Mother's Day. I also want to bring to our attention that there are a number of reasons that many individuals could be triggered on Mother's Day, and I think it's important for us to be mindful of that. I'm going to drop into the chat an article that I recently wrote on this topic. I think is quite appropriate for us to familiarize ourselves with it, but we have to realize that there's some people who have lost children, so it could be a really hard day for them. There are some people who can't have children, and maybe they're still dealing with infertility issues. We also have people who have lost mothers, right? And so this could be a triggering time as they think about Mother's Day. And then we can't forget that sometimes there are just strained relationships between mother and children. And so that could also add a dimension of complexity to this month. And so I just want us to be mindful. I want us to be mindful of how we're showing up, how in which we're extending those greetings, and just to know that not everyone is going to be showing up to Sunday, Mother's Day, with this high energy, maybe like others. And that's okay. Okay. So thank you in advance for keeping that in mind and helping us to just be appropriate in how in which we are acknowledging Mother's Day this year. Juneteenth is coming up next month, and so I always like to make sure that you all are aware of the different specially curated, meaningful experiences that NWC can make available to your organizations. So if you're looking to close in on your Juneteenth programming speaker, we would love to have a conversation with you, and we would love to co-create an experience that's going to help educate and uplift the reason for Juneteenth, so that we all can make sure that we are leaning into that holiday in a way that allows us to be very knowledgeable and respectful. Now, we have started something new at NWC, and I think this may be very beneficial to you all as our podcast community. I'm going to invite you right now to just get your smartphone out and scan that QR code. This allows you to opt in for our text that we send just like once a month, but it's to allow you to be able to have heads up notice of our Intentional Conversations guest co-host and other special events throughout the month that we may be planning for. And so if you want to make sure you never miss contact from us, then make sure that you scan that QR code and be a part of our community. Another QR code for you. We have a YouTube channel, and every single week we are uploading tons of great, rich content to our YouTube channel. And one of those content areas is part of Inclusion Uncomplicated, which is our video series. And it's all about simplifying DEI. These are short, no more than maybe 2-minute clips, but they're packed with a lot of punch. And so we hope that you will take advantage of subscribing to our YouTube channel, and also just sharing the information out in those videos whenever they come across your social media platforms. Now, it does me great pleasure to give you an introduction of some of the folks that we have to look forward to as part of our guest co-hosts in upcoming weeks on Intentional Conversations VodCast. I'm super excited because next Friday on May 17th, we will be welcoming Amber Tavares. And in that Intentional Conversation VodCast, we're going to discuss the cause of oppression and what she refers to as the 4 woundings and tools that we can implement to affect society. So join us on May 17th for that conversation. Following May 17th, on the following Friday, May 24th, it's going to be a great conversation. Paul Ladipo is going to be our guest co-host, and we're going to talk about the origins of the anti-DEI movement. Yes, there is a movement in place right now, but let me just be one of the first to tell you, or one of the many to tell you, that DEI is still alive and well. It's not going anywhere. But we're also going to talk about the 21st century racism, because it does look different than what we may recall from before. So join myself and Paul on the 24th for that conversation. And then closing out the month on May 31st, we have Casey Ariel Tobias. And in that Intentional Conversation VodCast, we're going to discuss the state of Black women-owned businesses, the legal landscape around DEI, and particularly its implications on all race-based initiatives that aim to close access gaps. And then also Casey's going to talk to us about the pathways to financial activism and social entrepreneurship. So I hope that you are marking those dates and times, and that you are planning to join us right back here for Intentional Conversations on each of those Fridays. If you've been part of our community, you know that one of the things that's critically important to me is to make sure that we give the accolades, the credentials, the background, the experiences of our guest co-hosts, so that you all can know how they show up to these conversations. And so today will be no different. I am so delighted to be able to help us to welcome Desireé B. Stevens. I'm going to read her formal bio, and then we'll welcome her and give her a chance to greet the audience in her own way. Desireé B. Stevens is a distinguished decolonization educator and counselor, passionately committed to fostering liberation through decolonization and a whole self-healing philosophy. With a deep-rooted belief in the power of comprehensive wellness, she brings a transformative approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And accessibility spaces. Born and raised in a multicultural community, she's joining us today from Atlanta, Georgia. Desireé was early on exposed to the intricacies of cultural intersections and the pressing need for systemic change. Desiree's career began in community outreach programs where she developed innovative workshops aimed at dismantling oppressive structures through education and dialogue. Her unique approach combines traditional counseling techniques with decolonial theory, promoting healing that considers the whole person, mind, the body, and the soul in the context of their cultural and historical backgrounds. Her work extends to public speaking, where she eloquently addresses the importance of holistic approaches to equity and mental health. So if you've been with us before, podcast community, you know what we do right now. We find those emojis, those reactions, those words of affirmation and welcome, and we share them to let our guest co-host know how grateful we are to have her here today. I'm going to add her to the spotlight, and I am going to give her a chance to greet you all in her own way, but we have a special way in which we like to do that, Desireé. And so what we're asking is that as you greet this audience, that you also share something with us that we would not know from reading or hearing your bio, which we just did, or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. So this is a chance for us to get deeply connected to who you are. And so share with us, my friend, and thank you so much for being here.
One, thank you so much for having me. I don't even know if I have a better way of introducing myself. You're amazing. Um, like a little unknown fact. You know what? I've been on social media for so long and shared so much of my life. I'm like, what don't people know about me?
Well, that's why we say your profile. Maybe not so much of what you've shared throughout maybe the years, but like if they were to go to like your profile page and look at all the things there, is there something else that you have intentionally not placed there because you're like, maybe
I'm
it's just
writing.
you're writing. Okay, that's great. So tell
I'm
us about that.
writing. So I started, it got bigger because of TikTok, right? Like TikTok was something so popular, especially for education purposes. And what I noticed is that it gets lost, right? Because of algorithms and things get put up here and it's rage baiting or inflammatory stuff. So it's like, here's this most, enraging thing that Desiree said. So I was like, oh, okay, let me kind of put all of my thoughts in one place. So I'm writing more on Substack and have been putting together ebooks for decolonization and whole self-healing. And that's not in my bio anywhere at the moment. So there goes
That is good to know. Well, congratulations to you. We look forward to hearing more about that,
Thank you.
especially once new content releases. We would love to be able to support you. So thanks so much for sharing that.
I appreciate it.
Okay, so I want to jump right in. I feel like this topic is a really important topic, and not a lot of people understand all the intersections of the broad nature in which you show up to this conversation regarding, DEIA and decolonialization. So could you elaborate on how your approach to decolonialization and whole self-healing philosophy informs your work in DEI? And you may have to help educate us on exactly what those two approaches are.
Okay, absolutely. So for me, it's a personal story, which I think is a super important thing when you're coming
Yeah.
into work such as this, right? From a multicultural background. I grew up with a first generation American, Irish American mom. My grandparents were from Ireland and like 30s when they came here. So still very much exposed to Irish culture. And my Blackness, obviously, never barred me from that culture. When you add on to that, I had a mother who was disabled, lost her leg. I myself am disabled. I've had back surgery. I've been down for a few years and finally back up. So there's all of these intersections of my own life. Thank you. I've been a teen mom and apparently a geriatric mom. I've been a GED student and a college student, right?
Yeah.
I have all of these approaches and intersections to come to it. And what I learned coming into the DEIA spectrum is the whole thing is not being addressed, right? Like,
Yeah.
how is the colonial project impacting our minds, our bodies, our souls? What is this system of colonization? And so when I came to it, I was like, we're going to pathologize whiteness as a system because I realized
Mhm.
in my own life, I was a white woman until I was about 28 years old, right? Because it's a mindset. It is a system that is imparted onto you. And only people with white skin can leverage it to the fullest extent. But it is a system that can be dismantled. And when you approach it as a system, what I've found is it kind of takes away that guilt, that shame, or that need to be a good person, right? I'm a good
Yeah.
person. I'm
Yeah.
not this. I'm not that. And I'm like, it really has nothing to do with you personally. It's a system that utilizes you against another person, and everybody can leverage a certain access point of it, right? Like for me, it's not about privilege, it's about how much you can leverage the system. And so when we approach it mind, body, and soul, we can be like, how is this impacting the way that I think? Right? The way
Hmm.
that I
Hmm.
feel, like when I get up in the morning and I'm exhausted, and the promises of capitalism, and that's not happening, and the promises of liberation and freedom. So when we're sitting down and we're like, okay, no, what's happening? What is happening? How is this impacting every single aspect of our lives? And not just saying, let's deal with anti-racism, which is simply a branch of an oppressive tree, right?
Yes.
We're
The
just
system.
limbing. It's an entire system that is interconnected. And visually, I like to think of it as a spider web. We're all caught in it. Some of us are closer to that spider eating us, but we are all here, and it's going to take all of us to dismantle it.
That is so well stated. I love a good analogy because it helps to make the work practical. So as you were
Thank you.
talking about branches of like this bigger, conglomerate or tree, and then even like a spider web, not all of us are maybe necessarily to the center of where the spider is sitting, but eventually we're going to find our way there. So we're all
Absolutely.
interconnected in so many ways. And you're so right. I think that it becomes more palatable for people to engage in dialogue around power, privilege, whiteness, when we can talk about it as a system, because otherwise we then take this level of shame upon ourselves to feel like, well, you're saying there's something wrong with me. And no, what we're saying
Right.
is there's something wrong with the system that is automatically conditioning you to operate, think, and behave a certain way. And I think that is an incredible reframe for those who have sat on the sidelines for so long, not wanting to engage in meaningful dialogue because of the feeling of the shame or feeling like I'm going to be attacked, right? And so I appreciate you bringing that to the conversation. I also love how a lot of your personal experiences, even in like your intersectional identities, has brought you to this place of this work that's really important. And that is usually the case for a lot of guests that we have on the show. They often were really impressed upon to go in a certain path because of their own personal experiences. So thank you for sharing so much of yourself. So I want to
Thank you.
back up a second. And while you certainly have told us about how in which you like to intersect the work of DEI with decolonialization and of course the whole self-healing philosophy, how did you get to this place? Yes,
Where do
let's
we
let's
begin?
back all the way up. Let's back all the way up. I mean, how did you get to this place?
So I would say that my awakening honestly came, goodness, can it be that long ago? 2008 or
Okay.
so. I was very active in my church on women's council, women's retreats, and going through all of these stuff. I became a, pastoral counselor. And they asked on the women's retreat, right? They were like, what's missing here? And they put, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And I was like, the woman. Like, this is like, you have a father, you have a child. Where is the mother, right? Speaking of Mother's Day this weekend, where is
Mhm.
this person? And when you have the practice of like exegesis, where you start taking things apart and what is this, what is that? And when it said Holy Spirit, it was like, okay, when you back that up, what does this word mean? What is that? And it's like, oh, it's a replacement for something that was missing, is what it broke
Mhm.
down to. And I'm like,
Mhm.
that's a problem. And where did this start?
Mhm.
And that took me down, like recognizing patriarchy, recognizing
Yeah.
Christianization as the first colonization, right? Everybody had spiritual practices, right? And
Mhm.
when you think about crusades and going through countries, that is the first conquering. What I often remind people of, and why it's so important to just put salve on the spirit and come to that whole self, is when white people approach anti-racism or DEIA, they come, whether they recognize it or not, with a savior mentality. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you don't even recognize who you were before you were white. And you don't even know what the hell happened to your own people, right?
Mhm.
Again,
Mhm.
being Irish and growing up and having those stories and having it very real in my life, my mother was very much still connected to that. I know the history of like what has happened in Ireland, what's still happening. It's still
Yeah.
colonized in 2024.
Mhm.
So when you're connected to those things, you feel differently about colonization and you recognize that it's the globe. Like it's
Yeah.
the globe that is colonized. So when that work came together, and I had a really amazing friend, Jason, who brought to my attention the lack of knowledge that I had, or the lack of awareness of my own whiteness, right? Like, no, we could do
Yeah.
that. We can. He was like, no, we can't. Where do you get that? That kind of opened up myself onto the path of really beginning to question, because that's really what it is, right? It's about questioning this. Why do I think this way? Who
Yeah.
were we before colonization? What were the stories our people told? Who were our people? Where's the ancestral connection to the generations before us that are not told by the colonizer? So
Yeah. Yeah.
that was my holistic approach to it. Like this has to be greater than we need, legislation. It's a system that's working exactly as it's meant to work. We don't need a
Yeah.
we can't fix the system. It's working. It needs to be dismantled, and we need
Yeah.
to reimagine a system outside of this colonial project.
Yeah, yeah, and that seems so hard for some people to even grasp that is the need. But I completely agree, and I think it's also important to bring to the conversation that when we talk about a system of whiteness, we aren't just talking about this system being conditioned by white people. We're talking about a system that so many of us, regardless of our demographics, fall into because that is what we've known. And that is what has been kind of ingrained in us just from our experiences, even to this day. And so I think that's an important element to bring to the conversation as well. I love this notion of questioning because I don't think that we spend enough time really interrogating our own thoughts and asking enough thoughtful questions. We're just constantly making statements after statements, and they seem so definitive to where we don't really leverage the full extent of curiosity in a way that I think could also serve us best. And so if we're sharing some things and this community, you are being enlightened, then I want to encourage you to use the chat to keep the conversations going. That's a way to keep us really proximate to each other in this virtual learning environment as we're learning with and from each other. So let's go to the next question, Desiree. And I want to talk about within your experience, what would you say can help us to effectively address what we're seeing right now as the anti-DEI movement and promote healing within the realm of anti-racism work?
Hmm. I have a very extreme thought on like on CEIA work. I'm not terribly upset with the pushback, right?
Mhm.
Because when it came out, white people, very specifically white women, jumped right on and
Yeah,
repeated everything Black women have been saying for 400 years,
yeah,
like, and got paid $20,000 to speak about it. And I'm like,
yeah,
that's amazing. And Black women are struggling out here
yeah,
trying to get this word out, trying to be paid for it. And one thing about Black women is we've always come to this space with grace, right?
yeah,
Doing the work, doing it, frustrated, tired, exhausted, dealing with the intersection of being a woman, being Black. Then you have to deal with on the spectrum, right? Like I benefit from colorism, featureism, texturism. I benefit from my proximity of having a white mother and white friends and what I could leverage. My Black life is not the same as the unambiguously Black woman
yeah,
with no whiteness to leverage at all. So all of these things needing to come into place. So for me, with the anti-DEI movement, what it's going to do is back white women up because they're going to be scared to go against
mm,
the system of patriarchy. As much as they claim they hate it, they're bedfellows, right? Like
yeah.
that just is what it is. They leverage their power based on their proximity to their white men in their lives. Like That's how that works. That's
Yeah.
how leveraging proximity works. So for me, I'm looking at it as more of an opportunity for our voices to be told in our way, the way that we have been doing it, because like you said in the beginning, it's not going anywhere. We're going to
Yeah.
continue pushing on. And now that it's gotten such a national platform, you have no choice but to listen. And now that we have access such as Zoom, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, where you have a world stage, we're not backing down. You can have
Um,
your anti-DEI movement. Best of luck, but
yeah.
we're not stopping.
Yeah.
Those are my thoughts
No,
on it.
I I absolutely love your optimism because I also sit in that camp of we can't lose hope. We have to continue to believe that we are going to overcome the noise and the violence that has been placed on this body of work. And but I also appreciate you bringing to the conversation a perspective that I had not considered, which is that maybe it is placing more appropriate attention on the right voices of this work. And I had not thought about that as one of the unintended consequences. And I say unintended because I would imagine that no one is sitting back saying, yes, this is what we want to happen. It's just kind of
Yeah,
organically happening while, people are trying to go after a different agenda. But that is interesting. And I know that has been a challenge from, many of the Black women and that are in my circle is that it seems a lot of times what our voices will say and will amplify does not carry nearly as much weight. And it's like, these are our experiences. How are they not carrying enough weight? And so, yeah, it does become incredibly frustrating. And so I appreciate you bringing that. We'll have to, now I'm going to be watching with a very specific lens to see where I'm noticing that.
yeah,
And by the way, let me say that here on Intentional Conversations, we love bringing different perspectives and different, thought partnership to the conversation because we truly believe, as I've said a couple times today, that we can learn with and from each other. And I think that is the best way is for us to be curious enough and open enough to receive different perspectives and thinking so that we can interrogate our own minds as we, navigate the complexity of this really important work that we need all of us to be engaged in. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next question. You've mentioned the importance of holistic approaches to equity and mental health. And of course, as I said in the beginning, this is Mental Health Awareness Month. So I dare not spend some time really unpacking that. But how do you advocate for comprehensive wellness in DEIA spaces?
yay. So here's how I'm going to say how I personally approach it. I believe in mutual aid in a very big way, right?
Mhm.
My thing is like you can't hustle healing. Like I find it very difficult to charge, right? And people want
I
to
want you to
like
say that again. I want to back up. I want you to say that again. You can't hustle healing. Just say it once again for us.
you can't hustle healing. I
That's,
I'm
I
gonna
love that.
put this on a t-shirt. So I personally, and you hear all the gurus and the money people, and it's like, you don't value yourself. And I'm like, no, fam, that's not it. How you create equity is there is somebody that can absolutely afford $1,500 a month, right? To be within my community, to have access to writings, unpacking groups, workshops. And if you could do that, you should do that, which makes it available for the person that can only do $5 a month, right? Because
Right.
you cannot, the people that poor people need it the most. It's wild to
Mhm.
me how capitalism, and that's yet another intersection of an oppressive system, right? So you're like, oh, I'm here to help. Oh, but it costs X, Y, and Z. And I
Mm,
understand we're all surviving capitalism, but I advocate for if you can do it, you know what you can do. You know what you
mm,
can do. And I'm going to hold you to task to do that. If you can support somebody that is doing this work and that is doing it basically free or in open forums or even closed community, but you can sponsor them at a higher rate, you got $5,000 to put it, 10,000, 500. That creates the equity for someone else to have access, right? And they shouldn't get lesser tier, right? I'm not going to
right,
say you pay $1,500 so you get this tier. No, no, that's not equity. Now
right,
you're still hustling healing. I'm saying everybody should have access to the same thing at all times. And those that have more financial capital should give at the level of their capacity. If somebody could give $1, that's $10,000 for somebody else. Feels like a the same when we're talking
Yeah,
equity, not equality. There's a difference. Well, everybody should get everything equally. Sounds good until you talk about intersections and like, my 24 hours a day is not the same as somebody that has on-site staff or,
right.
nannies or, it's that's not equitable. So for me,
Absolutely.
the advocacy comes from tasking people that can do more to do more to make it equitable for those that cannot do but still deserve, right? Like we got to really reframe our ideas of seeing people's value based in capitalism that's absolutely based on the slave economy that America created.
Man, I totally agree with that. And what you just gave us a lesson on is the 101 between the difference, the distinction between equality and equity. It's not, equality is giving everybody, what they need. And usually it's the same thing across the board, right? And it's
Right.
not always what they need, it's what people perceive as what they need. But actually, what we need to be doing is taking more of an individualized approach and understanding that every person's needs can be vastly different from the next person. So how do we really close that gap? And so I love the way that you talked about that. And that is really key. But I'm still stuck on the hustle. You can't hustle healing. Yeah, that does need to be a t-shirt. I
I
think it needs
know.
to even be a book. And so
Oh my God.
it needs to be a book. It needs to be a book as well. I
Credit
love
to
that.
you. Yeah,
Oh,
I will do that.
yeah. So can you share with us how your multicultural upbringing, you've talked about this a little bit, but I want to go a little bit deeper into this, but how your multicultural upbringing has shaped your perspective on DEI work?
Ooh, so if anybody, we're watching the Irish now. And if you see how they are playing zero games about what, if you want to see standing on business, look at the Irish. Like, um, so it's very interesting, right? Because in a colonial project and a system of whiteness, you are treated how you are perceived. But my upbringing, my advocacy, my rebellion, my push forth, most people will see like, oh, like the strong Black independent woman, right, who's boisterous. And then I'm like, that's interesting because it really came from my mother being such a rebellious Irish woman who was a community, activist and took zero
Yeah.
shit. Like, so, um, that is how it really, really shaped me. And being able to see the very parallel lines of Irish women and Black women, and recognizing I come from two of the strongest lines of oppressed people. No, the Irish were not slaves. That's not what I'm saying. But oppression is something that Irish people have faced, still continue to face, very similar
Yeah.
to Black people. And though it's different, this is part of that work, is seeing how it's the same, right? Your oppression may not be the same as somebody else's, but oppression is a problem that we are all facing. So it brought for me this, you can't touch me. Like you can't harm me,
Yeah.
right? Like this
Mhm.
this ancestral strength, right? Like by proclaiming and professing being Irish, we're still here, right?
Mhm.
By proclaiming and professing being Black, we're still here. It is
Yeah.
it is an act of just existing, because the point of colonialism, specifically in being Irish and where that fire in my gut came from, was the British had absolutely no intent of the Irish still existing. They thought they were going to come over there, take it over, and the Irish were going to be British. So if you are still here today and you are saying you're Irish,
Yeah.
that in and of itself shows you the strength and the resilience of your people. And then adding that to being Black as well. Like
Yeah.
they had no intention for us being free, right? Like the system intended for us to still be enslaved today.
Yeah.
And look at me, all Black and Irish, sitting here free, saying what I want to
Sitting
say.
here free.
It's just beautiful to me. So that's how those two parts of me came into play. Like it makes me feel unstoppable and it gives me an ancestral strength of resilience and take zero shit.
Well, I so appreciate you being here today, Desiree, because you're giving me a deeper appreciation for the two intersections, that you're talking about, that you are a part of. And hopefully others are being enlightened as well. And I think that's the beauty of these types of conversations. So thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. So this is a time of our show where I will alert the audience that your turn is coming up for you to present your questions and your comments to our guest co-host today, Desireé Stevens. And you can do that in a multitude of ways. One of which, if you're part of our Zoom community, you can use the raise hand feature. That lets me know that you are willing for us to invite you to the spotlight to unmute yourself and share your question or comments directly. Or if you want to just present your comments and questions into the chat, we welcome that as well. We're following that closely, bringing it into our conversations. And if you're watching via LinkedIn Live, go to the comment section. You can place your questions there, and we will definitely, as time permits, make sure that we are presenting those. While you're percolating what curiosities could be coming up for you, I'm going to go to the next question before I then open it up. So it just gives you a moment or two to think on what you may want to share. And this actually is a pretty big question. I do want us to unpack this in a deeper level. I'm sure that there are many people who are listening to this conversation or will listen to this conversation, whether it's in podcast capacity or the replay, and they may be thinking, well, how can I, right, as an individual or even as someone who has a level of influence within my organization, how can I incorporate decolonialization and holistic healing into our DEIA efforts? What are maybe 2 or 3 top pieces of advice that you would give to those individuals?
Hire
This is
Black
about
people.
making a difference and an impact. So we like to make sure we give some how-tos. Let's make it practical for the people.
I like it. Hire Black people. Like, I mean, I find it very wild. Like, that should be the first thing. Uh, like, why are you? Because it needs to be fluid, right? No matter where it is, because you can't share. Let me back this up. White women understand patriarchy very well.
Mhm.
Would you want a man speaking for you on feminist issues?
Mm,
If
yeah.
it's all men until it's no men, it's all white people until it's no white people. It's
Yeah.
that simple for me. So if you're really trying to be inclusive, right? And again, I understand trying to survive capitalism and you got the raise and you're making, that's nice. Reallocate those funds to somebody who can have a fluid conversation. You should not be doing DEIA work if you have to repeat what somebody else has said, go to your notes, and then need to go and ask them again for questions that came up. It's as simple as that for me. Hire the people that you are trying to make inclusive. Have somebody disabled, have fat people, have Black people, have queer people, have trans people. This is equity. We don't need a spokesperson. We need access into spaces. If you have that access, even if that's your position, well, I'm hiring a co-speaker with me.
Mhm.
Sometimes a company will not allow you to be like, no, I won't take this position. That's cool. I'm hiring a co-speaker. I'm
Right.
not, it's absolutely okay to turn around and say, you know what, I'm not well versed enough in this topic to truthfully provide the breadth that's needed here.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's really important self-awareness. And it's so intriguing to me how so many people don't even see that as being necessary, right? And I'm not one of those that believes that if someone is really serving as a true ally, and I do use that word true deliberately, we can unpack that a different day and time, but I do believe that there is value into having those allies to also help create messaging that allows people to engage in a much more effective manner. But they can't do it in silo without directly being proximate to the people who have those lived experiences. And so I know I feel like we're preaching to the choir often when we come to these spaces, because usually there's great alignment between the way that I think and I see this body of work with my guest co-hosts and to a lot of the people that show up to these conversations. But it's amazing to me how there's such a large population of people that they don't get it. And so
Well,
I think it's worth amplifying.
yeah, I do think so. And I don't even believe in allies, right? So like,
So talk to us about that. Yeah.
yeah, so ally is a war term, first of all, right? Ally in and of itself says that you're going to gain something and I'm going to gain something. That is what the word
Mhm.
ally is for. And it is literally a term for war. So if you are going to call yourself an ally, which one is not a self-proclaimed title, that's That must
Absolutely. Yes, something that has to be
and
earned. Yeah.
desist. You cannot be an ally to all Black people. We are not the dolphins. We are not tuna fish. We are not the cats that you want to rescue. We are individual people, and you may be an ally to your Black friend, and they may call you that. That does not mean you are an ally to all Black people. That must cease and desist. But ally is a war term. And unless you're ready to say that we are actually at war, then there are no allies, right? Like,
Yeah.
so we could co-create a lot of things, right? But I think that we need to stop using the word ally because then it also says we need them to do this work
Mm,
for us. And the truth of the matter is we need them to do this work for themselves. Again,
yeah.
when I asked the question, who were you before you were white? White is doesn't exist. It is a socioeconomic political stance. It was created to tell you who could vote and who could make money. And
Yeah.
even poor white men couldn't vote in this country. So like there's a lot to dissect, right?
Yeah.
And as soon as we can like kind of drop the ally thing and come to the situation as we collectively have a problem with oppression and we are seeking liberation collectively, right? I don't you don't need to talk for me. I'm talking. The words are coming out of my
Hmm.
mouth. I don't need you to stop me from speaking so you could speak. I do need access to certain areas that I can't get in, but I promise you, I could run my mouth. And I want you to also, right? Tell me what's impacting you. Tell me how colonization has impacted your white body. Tell me those hierarchies of whiteness. Talk about how you had to code switch, right? Talk about 3 generations ago, your own great grandparents were, sitting on plantations, though they may have been getting paid, and you left that behind. Let's talk about how you call white people poor white trash. Like, you can't help me until you could see your own people. You don't get to skip over your own to
Yeah.
help others. We either come at this collectively to dismantle it, or we're going to continue cycles. So that's kind of where I
Yeah.
land on allyship.
Yeah. No, I appreciate your perspective on that. So I want to lean into this a bit more, especially since I don't see any hands raised right now. But remember, the request is out there if you want to join the conversation. But I want to lean into this a bit more because I hear you and I so value your perspective and the way in which you're showing up to this conversation and sharing your thinking around this. I am of the belief that, and maybe this is a play on words, that we do, there is merit to having every one of us, as many of us as possible, kind of engaged in this work in a meaningful way.
I agree.
And I think that as we dissect, well, what is meaningful? There's probably multiple approaches that's going to be effective based upon the audience, right?
I agree.
And I do believe that there are a subset of individuals who are deeply rooted into, let's just say, the ally space, right? And and they really want to make sure that they are showing up as best as possible. So, if not the word ally, how would you describe those individuals? And what do you think would be the appropriate measure of ensuring their continued engagement in a way that helps the collective with the outcome that we're seeking?
Co-creators, because we're
Creators.
reimagining something different. We're
Yeah.
not, allies is fighting this system, right?
Yeah.
Fighting to make the system different. The system is working. It's been working since its inception.
It's
It
been
is
working the way it was designed.
it
Yeah.
is complete. It is an amazing system when you look at it, right? Like, it's like, wow, this really
Y'all
took
did
hold.
that.
You did that. Okay.
Yeah.
Shit. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
like it's really a co-creation, right? Because here's what it is that collectively we have to be honest when we're talking about whole self approach. Every white person, when they see these terrible things that are happening to the global majority,
Yeah.
take a breath and sit down and be like, at least I'm not Black. Like, you got to admit that. You have to admit that there is a safety in the feeling of your whiteness, right?
Oh, yeah, of course.
There is that
Of course.
safety, like, and we have to be honest and release shame in this work, right? I myself, I'm raising a Black boy. We don't talk enough about Black girls and their oppression, but let's just talk about, I have a Black boy. What? He's beige. He got blonde hair. He's gonna hide. He's not living again, back to those spectrums, when you're talking about a white supremacist society, he's not living
Yeah.
the same life as an unambiguously Black little boy. He's not going to look as threatening as his dark-skinned cousin, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, when you get upset enough for you, right? Because they could take a break in allyship,
Yeah.
take a breath,
Well,
and you don't
we
get to
can't
do
we
that.
can't take a break from
There's no
being
break.
disabled, or we can't take a break from being
Right.
Black. We can't take a break. Yes, all the things. I totally get it.
And
Yeah.
the first marginalization that shows up in a white supremacist society is your race, right? There's
Yeah, of
plenty of
course.
disabled white people, queer people, trans people that are white, but they're still white. So they're going to benefit from that before any other marginalization is seen. So when we can get them engaged in their own oppression, now you got to
Hmm.
fight. Now you got to
Yeah.
fight on your hands. Now they're
Yeah.
pissed off. You have to be so angry about this system that you just don't want it anymore.
Yeah.
And if it's
Yeah.
a
And
benefit for other people, that doesn't happen.
it's true. And let's face it, there are a subset of people who even if they are fully exposed, they don't care because that's what they wanted anyway. And that's what they want to be maintained. And so,
Right.
and so again, I think there's just there are different resistors, right?
Yes.
And I feel like we have to be strategic from a standpoint of, in order for us to reach the collective outcome that those of us who are reasonable and believe in humanity believe should happen, we have to think about what are those resistors based upon those individuals, and then what's our strategy to address that resistance, because each resistance could be different. Some people could dig their heels in and they're like, I don't care, this is what I want anyway, and this is what I want to be maintained. And oftentimes, I feel like I love the fact that there's great diversity even within our profession, because I believe that we need different people with different approaches,
I agree.
so that we can reach the masses, right? I often say I'm not talking to the person who's dug their heels into the sand pretty deeply and they said, I'm firmly right here, I don't care what you say, you're not going to change my mind. I would rather spend my energy and time on people that I believe are just unaware, they don't have the how to or the tools, and they're not equipped to be able to have those conversations. So I think we need all of us. I
Yes.
love that somebody placed into the chat. This is Nika, part of our community today. She says, we don't need a spokesperson, kind of repeating what you said. So true. We need people with lived experiences. So I don't
Yeah.
want those allies or co-creators, because I do love that framing too, to be a spokesperson, but I do want them to also leverage the power and the influence that they have to help move this along the way. I think there's
Yes.
multiple ways to do that. So I want to give you a chance to respond in case something's coming up for you.
Okay. Yes, I agree. And right, like this is my perspective. And it's not so like at the foundation of my work, I deal with the 15 pillars of supremacy culture, right? And it is not a binary and it's not a one-way
Right.
approach to it, right? This is my way. If it resonates with you, then
Yes.
come along on the journey. If Dr. Nika's does, go along on that journey.
Yes.
It's like there needs to be a war room, right? Like when you think about war and colonization, there's a war room. And they have been sitting down and watching this, and they're very strategic, like you said, about how this is. And there's going to be those that need to start their journey at being called allies. Like that's what you need to get you engaged in the work. Do that
Wow.
that are calling you allies and bringing allies in. If you are beyond that stage and you like, oh, I want to be a co-creator, that feels better in my body, right? That's that holistic approach. Start trusting yourself. There's not just one way. You don't have to not follow this person to follow that person. There are multiple ways of dismantling
Absolutely.
this system, and honoring your own truth that comes up in your body is going to be the best way, because you should be seeking alignment, because advocacy work is about capacity. Not everybody
Right.
could protest. Not everybody can, go run for office. Some people can just email. Some people can just make phone calls. Some people could just, feed the people that are at protests. There are so many ways to do this work, and we need all of those ways.
All of
So
those ways.
this is not me
Yes.
saying, don't do that. You're doing it wrong. This is saying that's not the way I approach it.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And that's exactly how you're coming across. And so
Okay,
I
good.
appreciate this discourse. And I don't even know if discourse is the right word. I think that we do have to be willing to have open dialogue about the different approaches. There are some people that are in this space that are very much like this is the narrow pathway and this is the only pathway. And if you're outside of this lane, then you're not doing the work right. And so we are certainly aligned on we need different practitioners to show up to this work because their approach can bring a subset of people along that maybe someone else's approach cannot. And so I love the firmness that you stand within how you show up to this work. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. I want to talk about boundaries because that's also a big part of your work. And you have a workshop that's coming up on the 19th. And so can you share some insights and takeaways from the boundaries workshop that you
Yeah.
are preparing for now?
So in boundaries, and I've been doing this workshop for about 3 years now because I recognize the people that come to me happen to be white women. And I recognize the lack of boundaries that we talk about of Black women, like the hair touching this, that, and other thing,
Yeah.
comes from there's two sections in the world, right? Like it's white and it's Black in America, the United States, right? And inside of whiteness, white women do not have their own autonomy. They don't have the ability to say no to a lot of things, right? The system of whiteness in and of itself is completely and utterly, without question, non-consensual. It tells you
Yeah.
who you are, what's your gender, what's your sexuality, it just it gives you these categories. So inside of whiteness, white women live boundaryless. And then they step outside of whiteness and they're all over here in Blackness, boundaryless. And I'm like, that's not going to work. And let me help you. Also, I learned that, well, within the workshop, a lot of people do boundaries. So what I do in the workshop is like, how do you even begin to create your boundaries? What are boundaries? And tools to maintain your boundaries. Those
Yes.
three aspects, right?
Yeah.
Because too many people get boundaries and rules mixed up, or boundaries and ultimatums. And I'm like, boundaries are what you do to protect yourself. You have zero
Yourself.
control
They're
over
for
another person.
you.
They're about you. So that is
Yes.
what you learn. How do I even sort out what my boundaries are? And when we do the boundaries, it's about, your time boundaries, money boundaries, sexual boundaries, familial boundaries. It goes through the full spectrum of your own human existence, right?
Wow.
And about protecting yourself and giving you key takeaways on like, how do I maintain this? Because that's one of those things. Everybody has, a Canva template on boundaries, but how do I maintain this?
Right.
How do I actually
Yes.
implement that in my life?
Yes. No, that great. It sounds like such an important and rich conversation to be had for lots of learning and tools. And so again, it's May 19th. We did place your website into the chat.
Thank you.
Can people just go to your website and register for this?
Yeah,
What is
if
the
you go
best?
to the link in the bio sort of thing, it says the CK page, that link for
Yep.
boundaries class is there. And for other things, that's my more fluid link, right? Where the website is pretty standard.
Yep.
Here's me, here's what I do. But that link kind of changes what the offerings are and what's coming up.
I love that. One of the things I often tell people when thinking about boundaries is, because there's a lot of guilt that people hold around boundaries. So when you said this is for us, that certainly resonated. It is for us. And I often tell people if they start to get offended by my boundaries that I'm not doing this to you, I'm doing this for me.
Yeah.
Understand that there is a difference. And so I love that you brought in this is not about rules. There's a difference and distinction between rules and boundaries, and helping people to unpack that I think is really critical. Again, and there's great alignment to this whole notion of leaning into radical well-being and self-care, especially during this mental health awareness month. So thank you for
Hmm.
that. I want to
Thank you.
highlight something that has shown up into the chat. So Heidi shares when we were talking about the different approaches to this work. She says different approaches help us challenge our own thinking. So true, Heidi. I agree. Really appreciating this conversation, how it's helping me to continue to evaluate how my intentions and impact align. Great stuff. Thank you for sharing that, Heidi. Okay, so you also have something else that you do, and it's called like the Sunday gatherings. And this is going to start in June, I'm understanding, and you're
Yes.
dancing. So there's some energy, some positive energy there. I know you want to talk about. So we're going to give you that chance to do so. So talk to us about these Sunday gatherings and how do these events contribute to the broader goals of decolonialization and healing?
Okay, I'm so excited about it. So thank you for asking. So for like the past 2 years, I've been doing unpacking support spaces, right? Like, and so many people are like, oh my God, this is great. Like, right? Like we get to unpack all of these things. I talk about whiteness as a system from the perspective of the allegory of Plato's allegory of the cave, right? And they're like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And it's been so good and feeding souls. And then I was looking for a physical space to have retreats and getaways. And then I'm like, wait a second, decolonization work is about collaboration work, right? Like this moment right here. And my friend Ashley has an amazing um, farm, Arabia farm, and glamping, and we're raising our kids together and doing all of this stuff. So
Oh,
we decided to start Sunday gatherings because as people are decolonizing and getting away from the church, that need to gather and come together is still something that's real, right?
oh yeah.
And for me, I don't want my education to be this. I don't want it to be a wagging of a finger, right? I want it to be, it's about community building, coming into community. Bring your children, bring a plate, let's sit down, let's have intentional body movements. Let's talk about things. What's going on with you? How are you feeling about everything that's going on in the world? And just really communing with each other in a way that's intentional while still like breaking down oppressive systems and working towards liberation. So I'm super stoked for that to go out and to be happening in June. It is one of my joys because as much as I love the access that the internet gives me, I want to touch people. I want people to touch me and talk to me, right? Like here, feel me, touch me, come into
Yeah.
community with me. Let me hold you physically and
Yeah.
energetically within that container. So it's like it's one of the greater things I'm excited about this year.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of socialize around some of my key takeaways today. Then I'm going to give you our last final moments to close us out in whatever way that feels appropriate. And in that regard, you can share anything that we haven't talked about that you're feeling a lot of energy for that you want this audience to know. But the first thing is, and these are no particular order, but you just talked about gathering and how gathering is all about community building and the importance of that. I totally agree. We are not meant to operate in isolation. We need others. And I think that that is part of our superpower that we don't lean into as often as we should. Whiteness is a system. It is a system that, regardless of who we are, our demographics, we all are conditioned to in so many ways. And so we need to fight the system. And that is a great way to help people to also find ways to engage in meaningful dialogue as they're continuing their journey to also help us dismantle the system. You can't hustle healing. That was my favorite from today. You can't hustle healing. I just love that so much. I'm gonna have to see a t-shirt coming out from you or a book or
I'll do it.
something.
I'll
So
do it.
I love that. Yes. We also talked about allyship and this concept of allyship and how in many ways it could send this message that certain individuals are needed and that, there's this war mentality. So I love the reframe of kind of being co-creators around the work so that we all kind of share in the responsibility of it as we're trying to collectively reach the goal and the outcomes. And then, of course, today you also talked about boundaries, and that was really impressionable too. Boundaries are not rules. Boundaries are for us, right? They're not for others. And so we need to make sure we understand that. And I think the understanding of that helps with our mental state of how in which we can comfortably adhere to our own boundaries without feeling shame or guilt. And I think that's critically important. And so those are some of my key takeaways. I'm sure that others are walking away with some key takeaways as well. I want to give you a final moments to close us out. And I want to first start by thanking you for showing up very authentically. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for spending this window of time with us. We don't take that lightly. And thank you for the work that you're doing. So close us out in your own way.
I appreciate you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for everybody that has shown up. And what I would like to close out with is always choose you. That's
Oh,
going to be the key to any and every single thing. Choose you. It is 100% okay to put yourself first. When you do that, you could show up for your community in the best way. And your community starts at home, right? So if
um,
we are putting ourselves first, if we are consistently choosing ourselves, that there's a shame in that because of Christianization, right? Like, oh, we're supposed to be selfless. And that's not a healthy approach to it because you give too much of yourself and parts of yourself away. And it is 100% okay to choose you, especially in activism, especially in advocacy, to ensure that you don't burn out because this work is generational work, right? We may
right.
not see the fruits of our labor. It may show up 3 generations down the line. So taking care of yourself deeply allows you to then take care of your community. And that is a major takeaway. I hope everybody finds a way to choose themselves over and over and over again in every small way that you can until it just becomes such a normal part of your life that That's it. If everybody's choosing themselves and
Yeah.
taking good care of themselves, we can all show up for each other in community. And that is how we, at least from my perspective, are going to dismantle oppressive systems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So well stated. Thank you so much. Again, really appreciate you. Have a great weekend, everyone. Have a safe weekend. And I'll hope to see you back here next Friday for another episode of Intentional Conversations podcast. Appreciate you for being here today.